Good afternoon. Of society and civilization by Thomas Paine. This lesson that we were dealing in the previous lecture and the remaining part that we have to conclude today. See the next para. For upwards of the 2 years from the commencement of the American War and to a longer period in several of the American states, there were no established forms of government. The old governments had been abolished, and the country was too much occupied in defense to employ its attention in establishing new government. Yet, during the interval, order and harmony were preserved as inviolate as in any country in Europe. There is a natural aptness in man, and more so in society, because it embraces a greater variety of abilities and resources to accommodate itself to whatever situation it is. So far, it from being true, it as has been pretended that the abolition of any formal government is an dissolution of society, that it acts by a contrary impulse and brings the latter the closer together. All that part of its organization which it had committed to its government develops again upon itself and acts through its medium. When men as well as men as well from natural instinct as from reciprocal benefits have habituated themselves to social and civilized life, there is always enough of its principles in practice to carry them through any changes they may find necessary or convenient to make in their government. In short, man is so naturally a creature of society that it is almost impossible to put him out of society. Formal government makes but a small part of civilized life, and when even the best the human wisdom can devise, the established it is a thing more in name and idea than in fact it is to the great and fundamental principles of society and civilization, to the common usage universally consented to, mutually and reciprocally maintained, to the unceasing circulation of interest which passing through its million channels in the whole mass of civilized man. It is to these things infinitely more than to anything which even the best instituted government can perform, that the safety and prosperity of the individual and of the whole depends. The more preferred civilization is, the less occasion has it for government, because the more does it regulate its own affairs and govern itself. But so contrary is the practice of old governments to the reason of the case, that the expense of them increased in the proportion they ought to diminish. It is but few general laws that civilized life requires, and those of such common usefulness that whether they are enforced by the forms of government or not, the effect will be nearly the same. If we consider what the principles are that first contains men into society and what are the motives that regulate their mutual intercourse. Afterwards, we shall find by the time we arrive at what is called government that nearly the whole of business is performed by the natural operation of the parts upon each other. Sorry. Man, with respect to all those matters, is more a creature of consistency than he is aware, or than government would wish him to believe. All the great laws of society are laws of nature, those of trade and commerce, whether with respect to the intercourse of individual or of nations, are laws of mutual and reciprocal interest. They are followed and obeyed because it is the interest of the parties so to do it, and not on account of any formal laws their government may impose or interpose. But how often is the natural propensity to society disturbed or destroyed by the operations of government, when latter, instead of being engrafted on the principles of the former, assumes to exist for itself and acts by partialities of favor and oppression, it become the cause of the mischiefs to it ought to prevent. If we look back to the riots of tumults which it at various times have happened in England, we shall find that they did not proceed from the want of government, but the government was itself the generating cause instead of consolidating society. It divided it, deprived it of its natural cohesion, and later on, which otherwise would not have existed in those associations which men promiscuously form for the purpose of trade or any concern, in which government is totally out of the question, and in which they act merely on the principles of society. We see how naturally the various parties unite, and this shows by comparison that governments, so far from being always the cause or means of order, are often the destruction of it. The riots of 1780 had no other source than the remains of those prejudices which the government itself had encouraged. But with respect to England, there are also other causes. Excess and inequalities of taxation, however disguised in the means, never fail to appear in their effects as a great mass of the community are thrown thereby into poverty and discontent. But as a fact of superior to reasoning, the instance of America presents itself to confirm these observations. If there is a country in the world where concord according to common calculation would be last would be least expected, it is America. Made up it is of people from different nations to different forms and habits of government, speaking different languages and more different in their modes of worship. It would appear that the union of such a people was impracticable. But by the simple operation of constructing government on the principle of society and rights of man, every difficulty retires and all parts are brought into cordial union. There, the poor are not oppressed, the rich are not privileged, industry is not mortified by the splendid extravagance of court writing at its expense. There is nothing no to render them rich, there is nothing to engender riots and tumults. A metaphysical man like Mr. Brooke would have tortured his invention to discover how such a people could be governed. He would have supposed that some must be managed by fraud, others by force, and all some contrivances. That genius must be hired to impose upon ignorance and show and parade to fascinate the vulgar. Lost in the abundance of his researches, he would have resolved and re-resolved and finally overlooked the plain and easy road that led directly before him. On the great advantages of the American Revolution has been that it led to the discovery of the principles and led upon imposition of government. All the revolution till then had been worked within the atmosphere of the court and never on the grand floor of a nation. The parties were always of the class of countries and whatever was their rage for reformation. They carefully preserved the fraud of profession. In all cases, they took care to represent the government as the thing made up of mysteries, which only themselves understood. They hid from understanding of the nation the only thing that was beneficial to know, namely, that government is nothing more than the national association, adding on the principles of society. Having thus endeavored to show that the social and civilized state of man is capable of performing within itself almost everything necessary to its protection and government, it will be proper, on the other hand, to take a review of the present old governments and examine whether their principles and practice are correspondent thereto. Here, in this prose of society and civilization. Thomas Paine speaks about civilized man, constitution of man, laws of society, coexistence of humanity, and our wants of happiness. In the in the concluding para of this prose, he stated that excess and inequality of taxation, however disguised in the means, never fail to appear in their effects. As a government, so as a great mass of community are thrown thereby into poverty and discontent, they are constantly on the brink of commotion and deprived as they unfortunately are of their means of information, are easily heated to outrage whatever to apparent cause that something is wrong in the system of government that endures the felicity by which society is to be preserved. According to Thomas Paine, society is everything good that people do and that we would not need government if everybody was good to each other. The last line is very important. We would not need government if everybody or everyone in the society is good to each other. Okay, with this I conclude. Thank you. Good day.